Forgiveness doesn't make the pain disappear. It simply asks you to decide, will you carry the scar with you, or leave it behind where you chose to walk away? We've walked through a 5-episode journey. 5 times Claire returned to face the shadows she once forgot, resented, or feared to name. Each encounter reopened an old wound, not to hurt, but to heal. And today is the final episode. There are no more memories to revisit, no more people to confront. What remains is the last choice: to carry it forward or to leave it behind. Early morning. Sunlight slipped through the window frame, falling gently across an open suitcase. Claire folded the last sweater neatly, then pulled the zipper closed. That sound, the soft zip of metal teeth, echoed in the stillness so clearly she could hear her own heartbeat. Not fast, not slow, just real. She stood there, both hands resting on the suitcase, eyes lowered, as if asking herself one final question. Are you ready? She had prepared to leave the night before, not to flee, not to escape, but for the first time, to walk away from a place she had once not been able to leave at all, because too many pieces of her had been left behind here. The wooden box still sat quietly on the shelf. Claire didn't touch it that morning. She didn't open the notebook, didn't reread the names, didn't add a final line. Everything had been said, everything had been faced, and now what remained didn't live in paper, but in the way she stepped through the door. She looked around the room, not as a farewell, but as someone checking for anything forgotten. Not clothes, not books, but unwrapped memories, lingering fears, or some fragment of herself still waiting to be taken. But for the first time, Claire felt unburdened. There was nothing left unseen, nothing left unspoken. Every wound had been named. Every person had been sat with, including herself. She stepped out of the room, the suitcase wheels whispering softly across the wooden floor. The house made no sound, no creaks, no groans, as if it, too, understood that Claire was leaving at exactly the right time. Not too early, not too late. Down in the kitchen, she boiled water, made a cup of tea like she did every morning. Her hands were steady. No trembling, no panic, no anticipation. Just the hands of someone who had made it through the storm and now knew even the things we once thought would destroy us eventually pass. While the kettle hissed softly, Claire stepped to the window. Outside, sunlight stretched over the weathered wooden fence. A sparrow landed on the poplar branch, tilting its head, peering into the house. Claire let out a quiet laugh, not because she felt joy, but because, for the first time, even the ordinary no longer felt like something to be afraid of. The tea in Claire's hand was still steaming as she returned to the living room. Morning light lay gently across everything. The worn armchair, the faded rug, the time-stained photo frame, all familiar, but nothing that held her back anymore. She sat down, placed a cup on the table, and for the first time since she moved back, she allowed herself to really look at the wooden box. It was still there, unchanged, unmoved, like memory itself. Not gone, just waiting to be acknowledged. Claire stood, walked over, and lifted the lid. The notebook lay inside, its leather cover weathered with time, pages no longer white. But they didn't need to be, because the notebook had done its part. It reopened the past, named the wounds, and proved that Claire had survived them all. She picked it up, flipped through a few pages. The crossed-out names were still there, not as erasures, but as witnesses. Proof she had sat with each person, faced each memory. Each name a pain, each pain a lesson, and she, the one who wrote the first word, was also the one to turn the last page. Claire sat on the floor, the notebook on her lap. She looked at it for a long time, then whispered, Thank you, but I don't need to carry you anymore. The words were lighter than she expected. No tremble, no wait, just a quiet truth. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and leaving something behind doesn't mean denying it ever mattered. It just means it's enough. She placed the notebook back into the box. This time, she added a new slip of paper. If you find this notebook, write your name first, not to be questioned, but to begin. No lock, no hiding. She simply closed the lid and set the box on the highest shelf, the most visible place. If someone were to enter this house after her, carrying a story still buried in silence, they would find it, and no, they are not the first to walk through the quiet. Claire stood. She didn't look back at the box. She didn't need to. It was already part of her, not as a chain, but as a reminder. Every scar has its reason for existing. The door closed behind Claire with no loud thud, just a soft click, barely a sound, but enough for her to know, it's done. She stood still on the front steps for a few seconds, a suitcase in one hand, not too heavy, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder, and in her chest, no sense that she was forgetting anything behind. There was no one to see her off. She didn't need that. Her mother had hugged her the night before. No apologies, no questions, just an embrace, gentle, slow, enough for Claire to know there was nothing left they needed to prove to each other. The morning light was bright. The road in front of the house stretched ahead, bathed in soft gold. Claire stepped down the stairs, her suitcase rolling quietly across the stone path. Each step felt free of hesitation. She had left this place before, in panic, in anger, in escape. But today, she walked away like someone who understood. Some houses aren't meant to be lived in forever. They're meant to be returned to, just once more, and then left behind. At the gate, she turned around. The house stood there, unchanged, neither beautiful nor ugly, just a house. Claire didn't look at it with longing or resentment. She looked with a strange fairness, as if acknowledging a chapter she had lived fully and could now finally set down. She didn't take a photo, didn't need to mark the moment, because when something has been truly faced, it no longer needs to be captured. It stays with you, not to wound, but also not to be erased. The wind stirred gently, the scent of early grass, new sunlight, freedom. Claire kept walking. Ahead was the main road, and behind her, for the first time in her life, was a house she left, without leaving any part of herself inside it. Claire boarded the earliest bus out of town. There weren't many people on board, a few elderly passengers, a young couple, and her. The seat beside her was empty, and that, strangely, felt like a relief. Not because she needed to be alone, but because, for once, she didn't need to retell her story, not even to herself. She sat still, her head resting lightly against the window. The world outside slid past slowly, the town retreating behind her, like an old film playing in reverse. The familiar streets, the cafe, the little church, everything was still there, but this time, nothing held on to her. Claire didn't try to remember. She didn't turn for one last look. She didn't need to. Everything worth carrying, she had already brought with her. Everything meant to be left behind was right where it belonged. From her bag, she pulled out a new notebook, not the old one. No names inside. The first page was blank. She placed her pen gently to the paper, paused a moment, then wrote, "The first day I write not to remember, not to heal, but simply to listen to how I'm living, for no one else but me." She closed the notebook, didn't plan to write anything more this morning. She wanted the day to pass simply, quietly, like it did for anyone else on this bus. No echoes, no flashbacks, just a woman sitting by the window, holding a new notebook, knowing the life ahead doesn't have to be better, only honest. She didn't know where she'd live, what she'd do, whom she'd meet. And for the first time, that uncertainty felt light. For years, Claire lived as a footnote to her own past. Now she chose to live, without carrying the evidence. The bus pulled out of the town center. The road stretched longer. Signs faded. The sun climbed higher, pouring through the glass, onto her face. Claire closed her eyes, breathed evenly. She didn't think of a single name from the old notebook. She didn't need to. This bus wasn't taking her far. It was simply taking her closer to herself. That afternoon, Claire stepped off the bus in a small, unfamiliar town. No one waiting, no sign with her name, no particular reason to choose this place. Except one, she had no memories here. And somehow that made her feel safe. Not because the past was terrifying, but because it had simply grown too full. She rented a small room behind an old bookstore. The landlady was a quiet, middle-aged woman who asked only 3 questions. How long do you need the room? Do you need extra blankets? Want to help you find temporary work? Claire answered in order, not sure, probably not, maybe later. That night, Claire didn't open her notebook, didn't write, didn't need to. The first page remained blank, not because she had nothing to say, but because for once, there was nothing pressing to pour out, no weight to release, no storm to manage. For the first time in years, the silence inside her wasn't a warning. It was a kind of peace she didn't yet know how to name. She wandered the neighborhood. Streetlights glowed softly gold. A bakery closed for the day. A group of college kids strummed guitars in a tiny park. Everything was quiet and unfamiliar, but she didn't feel out of place. Because for the first time, Claire didn't need anyone to know what she'd survived. She no longer wore her story like a frayed badge. She no longer tested who was worthy of hearing it. She simply walked, light, step by step. No evidence needed. No proclamation of victory. Because getting through wasn't a triumph. It was just another way to live, without being held hostage by what once was. Claire sat down on a bench beneath a weeping willow, hands tucked into her coat pockets, eyes following the quiet rhythm of people passing by. No one knew her name. No one needed to. And she didn't need to speak. There was no notebook to open, no name left to cross out, no confrontation waiting. Only life, and sometimes that's enough. The next morning, Claire made herself a cup of black coffee and stepped out onto the back porch of the small guest house. There was no sound but birdsong and the soft rustle of wind threading through the trees. The world was in a hurry, and for the first time in a very long time, neither was she. She just sat there, hands wrapped around the warm mug, gaze resting quietly on the dirt road in the distance, slowly warming under the morning sun. Beside her on the table lay the new notebook, the first page still blank. Claire didn't feel any pressure to write, no impulse to capture anything. The silence inside her no longer felt like a question, but a space, a free one. She reached over, placed the notebook gently on the lower shelf of the wooden table. No lock, no ceremony. She didn't need it to survive anymore. But if one day something needed to be said or remembered, it would be waiting. She wasn't starting a new chapter. She wasn't closing the old one either. She was simply living between the two. And in that space, there was no pressure to be healed enough, clear enough, brave enough. Claire stood, stepped down from the porch, hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, eyes turned toward the town ahead. Not a searching gaze, but the look of someone no longer running, not chasing answers, not proving forgiveness, not needing anyone to say, "You're okay now," because she already knew, quietly, surely. And as her feet touched the dirt path, where the sun had warmed the earth just enough to dry every trace of what had once clung, Claire smiled. Not from joy, but because now she no longer lived as if her pain had won. She simply lived as someone who had walked through it and kept walking. The forgiveness notebook was never a journey to find someone to blame. It was a journey to find herself beneath the old wounds that had been misnamed, blurred by silence, or erased by the very person who carried them. Over 6 episodes, Claire didn't just revisit memory. She reclaimed something many of us have quietly lost: trust in our own feelings. Because like Claire, so many of us have been told we remembered it wrong, that it wasn't a big deal, that we were weak for being hurt at all. But the notebook Claire found wasn't a ledger of guilt. It was a mirror showing her that every person had left a mark, and sometimes she herself had deepened those wounds by staying silent, blaming herself, or denying what she truly felt. In this series, forgiveness isn't a noble gesture. It's not a performance. It's a private, deeply personal choice. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiveness doesn't make what happened right. Forgiveness doesn't need anyone's approval. And perhaps most importantly, forgiveness isn't always for others. Sometimes it's the quietest thing you can say to yourself. You did everything you could. This series doesn't end in triumph. There's no hero, no villain, no perfectly tied up resolution. There is only Claire, someone who chose to turn over each memory, each name, each part of herself she once believed was too broken to return to. And in the end, she didn't erase what hurt her. She simply chose to live with all the things that once fractured her. And if any part of Claire's story felt like yours, then maybe, just maybe, you're already on your own way there. Thank you for staying with Claire and with yourself throughout this journey. If there was a moment in this series that left you sitting in silence for a while, share it in the comments, because maybe your story could be the wake-up point for someone else walking through their own darkness. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to keep walking with us through stories of healing, raw, real, and with a way forward. We deserve to live without having to apologize for the fact that we were hurt